Hello everyone, in today's video I'm going to be answering what I thought was a very good question that someone had recently asked me as I was racking up my chips to go home for the day. And the question was, how do you know when it's time to quit a poker session? Now there are many reasons to consider when it's time to decide if it's the right time to go home from a poker session, but on the screen here are some of the ones that immediately come to mind for me, and I'm going to dive into each of these specifically. But before I dive into it, I just want you guys to remember this one thing. In fact, if there's one thing that you take away from this entire video, this is what I want you guys to remember. It's so important. There is always a poker game running somewhere. Let that sink in for a second. Say it back to yourself if you need to. I can always find a poker game running somewhere. Whether it's at your local casino or card room, at a friend's home game, online, poker is running everywhere. It's not hard to find a game. And why this is so important to remember is because it's a reminder that poker is just one long, never-ending game that we're playing. When we rack up our chips, go home for the day, all that is we're taking a break, because the next day that we come to play poker, we're starting that game off right where we left off, basically. So the reason why this is important is because why on earth would you continue to play under bad conditions, either when you're tired or bored or not focused or the game is just bad, when you can come back another time tomorrow or the day after or later in the day when the game is good under good conditions. In fact, as long as we're thinking long term, this picture becomes even more clear, right? I see a lot of players end up losing a lot of money because they are stuck, they're chasing their losses, they feel like they need to get even before they go home, and they end up punting off all their chips, right? The reason why this makes zero sense is because why do you need to win right now in the first place? It's not like you're gonna go home and spend that money before you go to sleep. And if you do need the money that badly, you shouldn't be playing poker in the first place. That's a whole separate issue, right? But realistically, if you're stuck $300, for example, are you really going to go home and spend that $300 before you go to sleep? The answer is no, almost always, right? So you can come back tomorrow and still win that $300. It's all the same game when you look at it as one giant game. Just remember that. So let's look into some of the specific considerations that I personally look at when I decide if it's time to go home. And the first one is an obvious one. If the game is bad, there's just no point in playing. I mean, if the game is full of nits, if there's no action, if there's not a lot of chips on the table, if you're the worst player at the table, or if every other player at the table is pretty good or at the same level as you, if you know you can find a better game later on, just come back later. The next reason is if you feel tired. I think this is one that really gets overlooked often, and I'll explain why it gets overlooked. And the main reason is because when you're tired, you already are going to have impaired decision making. You're just not capable of making logical decisions the same way when you're fully awake and fully alert. And what that means is you might not even realize when you're tired. Let that one sink in for a second. You might be tired without realizing that you're tired. And that could have detrimental effects on your poker game. So we need to really pay attention to ourselves personally and start to identify some of the things that we do when we're tired. That way we know, that way we can recognize when we have the symptoms of being too tired to play. Some of those symptoms include your anxiety levels might be higher, your patience levels might be decreased, you feel less focused, and your memory starts to decline. If you feel any of these symptoms, especially the patience one for me, that's really one that for me is where I really start to notice. Like if I start to get bored and impatient and feel like I want to play hands that I shouldn't be, that's definitely a sign that I am starting to get a little sleepy and mentally fatigued. Another good reason to quit is if you're feeling bored. Again, I think this one also is a symptom of feeling tired. Low mental stimulation is often a good sign that either the game is bad or you're simply just tired. It could also simply just mean that you've been card dead for hours. I mean, that happens. And maybe you just have other things on your mind, which again means that if you're not focused, could be a good indication that you're just not really fully awake. And there's a lot of reasons why you might not feel focused, right? A lot of these things are not even poker related. You should definitely handle all non-poker related issues before you sit down at the poker table. That way you're not thinking about it still when you're at the poker table. And if your mind just isn't on the game, just come back later when you're focused. Another great reason to consider quitting your poker session is if you feel like you're on tilt. And I know for a lot of you, this one is easier said than done. If you struggle with tilt, you definitely need to start recognizing the signs when you're on tilt and what triggers your tilt. There are several different types of tilt that could all be triggered from different things, whether it's a bad beat, maybe it's entitlement tilt where you feel entitled to win the hand because you had a better starting hand, or because you feel like you're a better player than the person that just beat you. Maybe you are chasing your losses. There are a ton of different types of tilt. A lot of people, I think, don't realize that there are different types of tilt with different triggers. We could do a whole video on tilt. This video is not on tilt, so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I think it's a great idea that if you do struggle with tilt, to make a tilt journal where after your session, you basically just do a journal entry, all your thoughts, what you're thinking about, maybe some of the hands that you played, what happened. Come back and read those notes a day or two later when you're just completely focused and at a level mind. You might be surprised, and a lot of your logic just goes out the door when you're on tilt. So it helps to just relook at those scenarios with logic later on. But yeah, a tilt journal and understanding the different types and triggers of tilt, very important. We'll do a video on this later. Another consideration is your bankroll and stack size. And I don't advocate doing a hit and run strategy. It's not good etiquette, and it's just in the long run doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But there are some situations where you might want to book up a big win early, and it's perfectly okay. If you're a full-time poker player like myself, we already have a bankroll. This isn't going to be as important. But let's say you are a recreational poker player who's playing 1-2 no limit, buys in for 200. You run super hot in the first 90 minutes or so. You run that $200 to $2,000, and now you're thinking, wow, plus $1,800 would be a huge boost to my bankroll. Maybe I should just book the win and come back later. Maybe you're just simply not comfortable playing with $2,000 in front of you because you're not used to it yet. That would be a legit reason, I think, to book the win and come back later. Maybe the dynamics in the game have changed drastically. You can easily go from being the best player at the table to the worst player at the table, depending on who gets up and who sits down again. And it can change really fast in poker games. So that's another thing I would consider. But overall, if you are not comfortable playing the stack that's in front of you, or if it would be a significant boost to your bankroll, I think it's a fair reason to call out a session and come back later. So now that we've gone over some of the considerations that I would look at when determining whether or not it's a good time to leave the poker game and come back later, I just want to outline a few other very important things that kind of go along with this. And first off, I want you guys to really focus on your volume. I think a lot of poker players make the common mistake that when they go and play poker, they set in their minds a monetary goal of how much money they want to win that session. And what happens is, let's say their goal is to win $500 today, and they're stuck and they want to get even. And I mentioned this early in the video. Remember that you can always come back and play a better game later on with better conditions. But rather than making this mistake, which I feel like it traps you, instead of setting monetary goals, just set volume goals. Say, I want to play 40 hours a week or 40 hours a month or 10 hours a month, whatever it is, whatever fits your schedule, right? Just focus on how many hours you play, because in the long run, we're keeping track of all of our stats and data, right? We know what our hourly win rate should be in the long run based off of all of our sessions that we're recording. So at the end of the day, let's say you make $50 an hour when you play poker and you want to make $500 a month. You know that you need to play 10 hours a month. So that should be your goal, is to play 10 hours. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to for sure exactly win $500 every month because of variance, but it's something that we can measure and it's something that we have full control over. Setting monetary goals, you have no control over the variance at all, and that sets you up for failure. Now that we've covered everything, just want to do a quick recap. Whenever you are contemplating whether or not it's a good time to quit your poker game, do a mental checklist of everything that we just went through. If everything checks off as good, then sure, maybe you can extend another hour of play. But here's another thing to consider is, like I had just previously mentioned, is you should always be aware of what your hourly win rate is long term. If you're stuck $300, right, and your win rate is $50 an hour, you would technically have to play another 6 hours to get even. Now, we know that that's not how poker actually goes because of variance, but that's how you should think of it. Will playing another hour under these conditions really make my long-term results look any better? If you're looking at the long-term results, oftentimes extending your play unnecessarily isn't going to make a huge difference in your long-term results. So keep that in mind. Keep everything in mind. Go through this checklist. If anything is a no, you should probably just call it quits. Bottom line though, you can always find a poker game somewhere. There's no need to continue playing now.